Coming up today on Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS, it's Blue Friday. It is preview time. And today I'm going to get help looking ahead to the Patriots matchup with a couple of Patriots content creators who are very good at what they do. Pete and Divij from the Foxborough Fellas Pod will join me next. I'll get you caught up on some Seahawks news, and then we'll take a deep dive into this Sunday's game. How do the Seahawks look heading into week 2, trying to get to 2-0? That's coming up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Be sure to hit that thumbs up on the YouTube video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notification of future episodes. You can listen to the audio version of this podcast on any platform. Be sure to like, subscribe there as well. Leave a rating and review if you really like what you hear. And all the other ways to support the show down below in the description. I believe his name is Bruce. Gave me a very generous super thanks yesterday for one of my recent episodes. Really appreciate any way that you can support the show, even if it just means subscribing and sharing this episode. And shout out to the folks at BetUS for sponsoring today's episode as well. I want to get to some news updates before we get into this preview with Pete and Divij. First, let's talk about some injuries, because there was a change yesterday on the injury report. Terrell Dodson had missed practice on Wednesday with a shoulder injury. There was some trepidation about that, especially after the way he played in week 1. He was back out there yesterday. Ken Walker was not yet. George Fant was not. And Pharaoh Brown, who had looked better earlier in the week, also missed yesterday's practice. So I'm not expecting to see any of those guys. Now, Walker might be a game time decision. He did say after the game last week, I'm good. But we have seen this with oblique injuries in particular. And Walker has some history with this. Remember, he missed week 1 a year ago, and then it took them some time to ease him back in. That's a tricky injury, and you want him for the long haul. And so I'm expecting to see Zach Charbonnet, Kenny McIntosh on Sunday. I'm certain the team would then elevate George Halani from the practice squad as well to give him a third running back. But would love to see Ken Walker out there, to see him build on his week 1 performance. But if he's not, at least the Seahawks would appear to be in good hands in their running back room. And then I want to play this for you. This happened earlier this week on an interview on Seattle Sports Radio 710 here. Daniel Jeremiah, who I have the utmost respect for in the work that he does for NFL Network and the Move the Sticks podcast with Bucky Brooks. He was on local radio, and he was asked, what he thought of the Seahawks week 1 performance. And it's a pretty long soundbite here, because he wanted to make sure he got all of the superlatives in. These are all of Daniel Jeremiah's thoughts, specifically about what he saw from Mike Macdonald's defense in week 1 in that win over the Broncos.
Awesome. Obviously, the coverage in the back end. They have 2 picks. They dropped 2 more. I mean, they could easily have 4 interceptions in that game. You look at what they do at the line of scrimmage all the way across the board. They did a nice job of generating pressure. Draymond Jones got some push. They were impressive with what they did. The secondary, Love was all over the field. We talked about it last week, but Witherspoon in this defense, being able to insert him not only as a blitzer, but someone who can, fit the run as well as what he does there. You go to the first round rookie on the defensive line, Byron Murphy, and it's like that same funky little go to a knee technique that he uses against the run and anchors down. That's like one of the more unique things I've ever seen. He's doing the same thing to NFL players. So I came out looking at the whole tape, and I was like, okay, this defense is really, really fun. And then you're like, okay, well, make sure my eyes aren't lying to me. Let me look at all the numbers, like all the statistics for the week. And it matched. They were second in pressures. They were third in QB hits. That being said, they dropped 2 picks. They had 7 missed tackles, so there's still room for them to even get better. I like to see kind of what the coverage tendencies were. Like, they're not really in the top in any coverage. Like, they mixed their coverages up throughout the entire game.
Interesting that he brought up the coverage mix, because as you look at the breakdown now and compare it to the rest of the league, the Seahawks, as much as anybody in the NFL in week 1, mixed up their coverages, really didn't play heavy one way or the other. A lot of 20%, 21% when it came to some of their coverages there. It'd be interesting to watch how that evolves as we go week to week. One of the storylines this offseason was that a change in approach that we can expect to see this year with Mike Macdonald and how he manages a defense compared to what we saw from Pete Carroll over such a long period of time is more variation on a week in, week out basis in the game plan and how he lines up and how he deploys the scheme. And so it'll be one of the big storylines as we move forward this season, is to see over time how those fluctuate from week to week. But let's get into this game in particular. The Seahawks travel to Foxborough. One other interesting note this week, Mike Macdonald confirming that, after seeing all the success Pete Carroll had over the last 10, 12 years in traveling back to play 10 a.m. Pacific time East Coast games, something that was a real Achilles heel for Mike Holmgren coach teams that literally appeared to be sleepwalking at times at beginning of games, that Carroll really found the magic sauce there. And two of those components were more 10 a.m. practices so that you're on the same clock, and flying back to the East Coast on Friday rather than Saturday. Mike Macdonald did say a couple of days ago that he is keeping those parameters in place. So we'll see if that can carry over to success, as this is the first of 3 10 a.m. games, I believe, this year. Let's get into this. We're going to preview just about every aspect possible of this game. This is, again, Pete and Divij of the Foxborough Fellas Pod on YouTube and audio. I'll put all their stuff down in the description. Really, really sharp guys. And as Seahawks fans, I know there's a lot of emotion when it comes to the Patriots. We address that head on. I think you're going to like these guys. So enjoy this. Joined today by co-hosts of the Foxborough Fellas Pod. So that's Pete and that's Divij right there. Welcome to the show, guys. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having us.
That's fun, yeah.
So I want to start here before we get into how you guys are feeling about the Patriots team and what Seahawks fans can look for in the matchup this Sunday. Kind of the big news today in the NFL is what happened in Thursday Night Football last night. Miami against Buffalo, a convincing win for the Bills. And, this impacts you guys from a divisional standpoint. Tua Tagovailoa, once again, with what appears to be a very severe concussion. Mike McDaniel talking this morning as if they're going to be moving forward indefinitely with Skylar Thompson as their quarterback. And we just don't really know what kind of condition Tagovailoa is in, but we've seen this before. Your general thoughts on it as a football fan, as a Patriots fan, as a rival, and the impact that you think that this might have on the division as a whole.
I mean, it's going to have a huge impact on the division. All of a sudden, the Miami Dolphins move to compete with the Patriots for the bottom of the division. But that aside, this is his 4th concussion, and this man needs to consider his future and his health right now. There's some pretty serious implications of CTE, as we've seen over the years. And I think all of my football thoughts kind of have been pushed aside for like a moment, and just thinking, is he even going to come back to the NFL as a whole? Never mind how it affects me and my Patriot fans, and the AFC East. But, with that being aside, and then focusing on the football, I mean, I think now all of a sudden the Bills moved to the top of the AFC East, and if Aaron Rodgers can, improve off his Week 1 performance, maybe he can flirt with competing for that number 1 spot. But makes us as Patriots fans who win Week 1 just a little bit excited.
Yeah. I think first off, this is something that is bigger than just one team, one player, and the league as a whole. 4 concussions in 23 months is no joke. We've all known when this happened in the 2022 year that the more concussions you have, the more likelihood you have to get a concussion later. Even with this hit, this wasn't even Damar Hamlin particularly laying a hit on him. It was basically just contact to his head that caused this concussion, which just goes on to show how serious this is. Not having 3 concussions in the past. We've seen players medically retire after 3 concussions. And 4 concussions, if you read any credible medical source, could have long-term mobility effects, long-term processing effects, long-term attention effects. And that is one thing we just have to look at, that some things are just bigger than the sport. And just hoping that Tua is okay. I think at this point he needs to make the decision, what is the best decision for him to make for the next 55, 60 years of his life, rather than the next 5 to 10 years of a football career. Yeah. So first things first there. I think from a divisional perspective and from a Patriots perspective, this changes a couple things. First thing, obviously, we still have both matchups left with the Dolphins. Along with that, the Dolphins also have 5 other divisional matchups left. So when it comes to both draft order and just where we stand as a whole, I think divisional matchups are always considered as a tiebreaker, and that was going to be something that will be looked at pretty significantly when it comes to the second half of the year. The second impact for the Patriots is obviously Drake May. So we are scheduled to play the Dolphins week 5, and I think the Patriots and Gerard Mayo's plan for Drake May so far has just been to make the offense as easy and as understandable as possible for him. And if that means sitting him for a little bit, that's okay. And outside of the incident from yesterday, and not Dolphins now starting Skylar Thompson, Dolphins did have some struggles on a very average Bills offensive line when it comes to considering creating pass rush. Chop Robinson, like expected, was just a true bull rusher who needs a lot of improvement.
Yeah.
And then all their attention went towards Jalen Phillips, and they were able to bracket him in pass protection. So that is going to be something that the week 5 matchup now looks like you don't need to put more than 20 points up to win that game potentially. And knowing that there's a way to control this Miami Dolphins pass rush, that looks likelier and likelier that the Patriots will start Drake May there. And the storyline is obviously going to be that that's Tom Brady's 5th game as the Fox, and he as the Fox play-by-play caller, and he's going to be calling potentially the future of the Patriots franchise.
I want to get your thoughts on Tom Brady's debut because that's gotten a lot of buzz. We'll get into that a little bit later. I appreciate your perspective on the Tagovailoa situation. You know, there's the football aspect of it because it's a game we love, but it's an inherently very dangerous one. Seahawks are impacted from a football perspective as well as they're set to host the Dolphins next Sunday in week 3 here. Clearly, Tua won't be playing in that game. They'll be facing Skylar Thompson. Before we get into this year's team, cannot talk to a couple of Patriots hosts, content creators, guys that cover the Patriots, passionate fans, without addressing the elephant in the room, right? And the Patriots are going to address it in a big way. They're going to trot out all of the stars from 10 years ago from that Super Bowl win over the Seahawks in Super Bowl 49, just as the Seahawks did 2 years ago in the opener against Denver, just to kind of troll Russell Wilson. And they brought a bunch of guys out from their past. Let me start with this. How annoying are Seahawk fans to Patriot fans?
I don't think that annoying, to be honest with you.
Because I'm kind of annoyed by Seahawk fans that won't let it go. Like it was the most painful football moment of my life. Don't get me wrong. I can't watch it. I can't. And so I'm planning on just tuning into the game about 2 or 3 minutes after kickoff on Sunday because I think they'll probably show it about 10 times.
That's totally fair. It's kind of like Red Sox fans with Bill Buckner. I mean, you just can't watch that play.
Yeah.
That's a good.
It's the same with me with both the David Tyree helmet catch and the Philly special. I cannot watch those plays.
Yeah. Okay. You've got your own. Yeah. The Tyree thing. That's
But the one thing I was going to say with this, with the Seahawk fan base, I was in Seattle last summer. Got to visit T-Mobile Park as well, but met a lot of Seahawks fans there in Seattle, sports fans. And on one of my tours, I was just wearing one of my Patriots sweatshirts, and they just all came up and they were like more upset about the play call and how bad of a throw that was.
Right.
Than necessarily at the Patriots, because he was like, I think a lot of the Seahawks fans understood that the Patriots were also there to win a championship. So they just made the play. And he was like, we cannot put 2 bad decisions by our organization on you just because you were the ones on the other side. So I appreciated that a lot. And I feel like we are in the AFC East. You do not expect that from Jets fans. You do not expect that from Dolphins fans. So that was definitely very, very nice of Seahawks fans.
Well, I will say for the record, anyone that watches my show has heard this before, certainly, but for any Patriots fans tuning in, of which side of the ledger I stand on the side that in that moment, in that situation, throwing the football was the right thing to do. That any other belief is revisionist history and hindsight being 2020, with the small exception of I do take umbrage with the personnel grouping that was used, how you don't involve Doug Baldwin, your best receiver, in that. And when that's a play that was a bread and butter of theirs, that they went too many times, you use your 5th best receiver on the roster as the intended target was a terrible decision. And then if you are of the belief that they just should have run the ball, they just should have handed it to Marshawn no matter what against a 9-man box, that you then should probably also believe that they just should have taken the timeout and gathered themselves, and then it would have been a little different. So that's just for the record. I just wanted to get my
I agree with that. And one thing is also that you cannot take away blame for Russell Wilson to throw in inside slant against inside leverage. So that is something where quarterback decision making also comes in.
I will say, though, it's heavily covered. Bill Belichick practiced this play in the red zone on the goal line with Malcolm Butler in this exact scenario. And he read it exactly as he did all week in practice and then just executed it in the game. So there is something to be said. While it might have been a poor decision not to run the ball, right? Might be revisionist history or just a poor decision. Who knows, right? But also for Russell Wilson to put that ball there. But where's the credit? You might credit some to the legendary, former coach now, Bill Belichick, for just putting his players in the right position to make a play, stacking the box, thinking, throw it, go ahead. We're ready for that too.
He knew a thing or two about getting teams ready to play big games, didn't he?
Maybe just.
And then one more historical note before we move on. And you guys are much younger than me. You might not even remember this, but drives me crazy to remember 1992 because it was a very impactful year for me as a Seahawks fan. And also I went to Washington State University. And so watched Drew Bledsoe up close. And it was only because we happened to eke out one of our 2 wins in 1992 at Foxborough over the Patriots early in the season. And then later in the season, we won our second game. It was a overtime win against Denver, which cost us, actually beating the Patriots that year, cost us the number 1 pick in the 1993 draft. And so instead of Drew Bledsoe, we get Rick Meyer, and the rest is history. So
that was actually a Patriots season opener. I think this is the 3rd time we've met as a season opener, that being one of them. I think you guys won 10-6. I was doing a little read up before the pod.
And then the most interesting anomalies I've come across as I was looking back and just trying to make sure I had the years right. Because if I say anything off the top of my head, you guys probably know this on your show, that somebody in the comments will come in and say, hey, you got that wrong. That in 1993, then Bledsoe at the helm for the Patriots, Meyer for the Seahawks, and Meyer actually was really good his rookie year, and then don't know what happened after that. They played twice in 1993. Yeah. It was just a weird scheduling thing where the the divisions weren't all evenly balanced back then. It wasn't 4 teams per division, so when you played an interconference matchup, sometimes there was an odd. There was an extra game that needed to be made up, and they actually played twice that year. I had to look that up on 3 different websites just to make sure that I was seeing that right, because I didn't recall it. So.
I also read that too and just didn't believe it at first glance and had to go look at a second website. Pretty interesting, old-timey history there.
And there's a lot of 2012, the UMad Bro game was really kind of the first moment here in Seattle that we could see the makings of something special happening with that Legion of Boom, with Sherman picking off Brady late in the game to seal that one. Even the 2020 game, the last meeting between these two, there was a really memorable Sunday night game in 2016. Also, Cam Chancellor breaking up the pass in the end zone intended for Gronkowski. But 2020, the greatest game, Cam Newton never played for the Patriots. And it was early in the season. He threw for almost 400 yards, ran for a couple of scores. And I remember thinking at the time, like, I guess Newton's not washed up. And then I think after that, he looked very, very, very washed up. And it
came back there.
After that.
We did quite the opposite of the Seahawks. We called the quarterback draw on the goal line when we had
That was the let Russ cook year too, where they just hung it all out to dry the first 8 games and then shut it down. So anyway, let's talk about these teams. And you guys must be feeling pretty good. Maybe the upset of the year for week 1 anyway, the biggest upset in the leagues, going into Cincinnati and beating the Bengals 16-10. Did either of you expect to see the performance that you ultimately saw?
No, and if anyone tells you differently, they're absolutely lying to you. 100% lying to you if they predicted the Patriots would come out victorious in this game. Division I, on the record, picked the Bengals to win this game, and certainly didn't expect an upset. I don't know about you, Divij.
Oh no, I agree. I think the only thing that me and Pete were in agreement of was that this was, if they had to win the game, the small percentage chance that they had to win that game, there was only one recipe to win that game, is forcing turnovers, keeping the ball on the ground, and eliminating mistakes on your own side. And I think that was the only recipe for this page. That's the only way they could have won that game, and they did. But no, I don't think any of us were going into that game very confident. And we'll obviously discuss the matchups, but there's some things that I am still not confident about on this Patriots team and some things that I am. So we'll get into more detail of that.
Let's talk about the good stuff first. I mean, you mentioned the turnovers. There was a key moment in the second quarter, I think, or at some point in the first half where it appeared that Joe Burrow had thrown a touchdown pass to Mike Gesicki. That was overturned on replay. And then the very next play, it looked like he had thrown another touchdown pass. Defender bats the ball out. I think it was Kyle Duggar made the play, right? Knocks the ball out, goal line, recovers it. And then Ramondre Stevenson took over. I mean, as someone who, watches other teams in the league primarily through the lens of fantasy football, I've known Ramondre Stevenson as a very physically talented running back, but who, is inconsistent in his performance. And much of that can just be, that's just the way it's been with Patriots running backs over the years, which is why I never draft him in fantasy football. This appears to be different. They treated him like a bell cow running back in week 1. And he responded. Monster game from him and really helped them control the clock. Is that's obviously going to be the focal point moving forward. But are you a little concerned that now that teams like Seattle this week are going to be gearing up for that a little bit? Are you confident enough that at some point Jacoby Brissett, and we're going to talk a little bit about the possibility of Drake May, can make better use of his weapons and get some of that passing game involved as well?
I mean, he's going to need to get the passing game involved. That's one of the things Divij and I talked about in our review of the game, is that he was able to rely on Stevenson to rush the ball 25 times. I think they ran the ball like 14 more times than they passed the ball in last week's game. Don't quote me on the 14. It's around there. But they ran significantly more. Antonio Gibson is still listed as questionable and I think isn't fully healthy right now. And had he been fully healthy, maybe you don't see Stevenson get over those 20 carries or up to 25 like he did. So looking to see more Gibson, and he's a pass catching back. So maybe that does open up some more doors for Jacoby. But Stevenson's good out of the backfield too. He can catch too. So it's not like they would not throw it to him, because he's not a Derrick Henry. They don't just not throw it to him or, find no success there. But Jacoby's going to need to throw the ball more. I think now that they have some tape and on their receivers, they can figure out some better, routes or some better plays to get them the ball. Our rookie Jalen Polk was open a lot, yet only was targeted once. KJ Osborne was targeted a lot and did not show much. So maybe there's a little switch there in the depth chart and targets from Jacoby Brissett.
I agree with that. I think so. Per Next Gen Stats, Ramondre Stevenson saw 8-man boxes on 24.5% of his carries, which something that throughout the game I was expecting defensive coordinator of Lou Anarumo's credibility to make some adjustments there. So it was surprising to see that the Bengals did not make those adjustments, but I do not expect Mike McDonald to make the same mistakes. But the one thing that stood out when I watched the All-22 both on Monday and watched again on Tuesday is there were receivers open that Jacoby Brissett had time to throw to, but just because of the play design, they were either the third read or even the fourth read in some cases. And these guys were Jalen Polk and Demario Douglas. They did find ways to separate. It was just that they were on the offside of the quarterback. So if it was a right-hand side play, they were on the left-hand side and vice versa. And I think that would be something that now that it is on film, that is something that I trust this offensive staff to make some adjustment towards, bringing those guys or keeping those guys in either sides, because those two guys I would say are probably our best separators on the outside, or at least in the wide receiver room. Along with that, this clearly came down to the fact that the Patriots did not have to, but because the run game was going so well, and most of the second half we were just trying to play ball control football. Yeah. But for a team that was supposed to be very run heavy and ran a lot from under center, there were not a lot of under center play action plays called, which, as we all know, can ease a lot of things for the quarterback. So the more I expect more of an under center play action based offense, because I do believe that the 8-man box number from Seattle's defense could go up even as high as 35 or 40%, but I definitely believe it'll be over 30% when Patriots are under center and Ramondre is the tailback. The last thing I do want to say about this passing offense, a lot of attention to the tight ends from 12 personnel went towards Hunter Henry, and it left Austin Hooper matched up one-on-one against linebackers. So Austin Hooper had 4 targets. All of them came against linebackers per PFF starting. And I think that will be one adjustment that I expect Seattle to make in the pass game, to pay closer attention, maybe match up safety, maybe in zone plays, only use the tight end as a jammer rather than a coverage guy on Austin Hooper against 12 personnel. And hopefully that takes a little bit of attention away from our better tight end in Hunter Henry and get him in spaces and like allow him to sit down in zones, which he did not have the opportunity to do week 1.
It'll be interesting to see that matchup. I think in some ways Jacoby Brissett's game is similar to what the Seahawks and Mike McDonald's defense saw in week 1 in Bo Nix, and that he's pretty quick to move around in the pocket. That's kind of his game. And Jacoby Brissett's no stranger to Mike McDonald's defense. Playing for the Browns in 2022, he faced them. McDonald's first year back as defensive coordinator after the 1 year at Michigan, and he was pretty effective. 22 out of 27 for 258 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. He wasn't dynamic. He did take 5 sacks, but he there's a lot of reps where he's moving around, avoiding pressure, and then checking the ball down and using the tight ends, to your point, quite heavily. It sounds like that's the kind of game that you would expect to see him play, or that he would need to play for this offense to function.
I feel like Jacoby Brissett more so runs out of a broken play than he does out of anything else. I think he had 6 carries, Divij, correct me if I'm wrong, last week, and most of them were out of exactly that, a scramble. It felt like Jacoby Brissett last week was looking at his first read and then moving to his second really quick, or throwing it to his first read really quick. There wasn't much long time in the pocket, and he knows he doesn't have a long time in the pocket behind the Patriots offensive line, which is pretty bad, for lack of a better term. I was projecting them to rank 32 out of 32, but they were probably, Division I kind of estimated, probably 23 to 25 if you were to rank the offensive line unit against the rest of the NFL. So a little bit better, but still bottom tier. So Jacoby Brissett has to throw the ball quick. And when they run, sometimes they bring in a 6th offensive lineman. They did it 18 times last week. They brought in rookie Caden Wallace as a 6th offensive lineman and ran out of that formation most of the time. So they know they need the help when it comes to blocking, especially during the pass and even more so during the run.
You touched on something there that's foremost on the mind of Seahawks fans, and has been for several years as an Achilles heel with this roster, and that is the performance of the offensive line. Seahawks did a lot of work this offseason to add assets to that position group, but it's a group that hasn't played together much, and it showed early in the game, especially last week. It was a debacle. For all the things that these two teams have in common, moving on from legendary coaches to much younger defensive-minded coaches and veteran quarterbacks who have been around the league, both of them backed up by young North Carolina products. One thing that's really glaring and may ultimately decide the game is who can function the most up front on offense. To your point, the PFF, I think, has New England, their offensive line, due in part somewhat to injuries, which I want to ask you about. As the 32nd ranked offensive line this week, Seattle not much better at 27. It may come down to which line plays the best on Sunday. What is the status of that offensive line? I know there's some injuries you're dealing with, especially on the left side, right?
Yeah, the left side is decimated. Go ahead, David.
So last week our second-year left guard, City Sau, out of Central Michigan. He's been banged up since the last game of preseason and a couple of practices after, and he missed practice both Wednesday and Thursday. So all signs point towards him not playing. Along with that, we saw Chuck Okorofor, who we signed in free agency from Pittsburgh. He started the first game as left tackle. In the middle of the second drive, was pulled out because of an absolutely horrific performance in both pass protection and missing open run blocks.
That is an incredibly quick hook.
12 snaps.
Yeah. And Vidarian Lowe came in and actually, I wouldn't say blew anyone out of the water, but kind of just held his own. Like, I would say just like an average filling the gap performance. So far this week in practice, it seemed like the offensive line that finished the game against the Bengals is going to be starting the game against the Seahawks, which to me makes perfect sense. I think from the Patriots offensive line perspective, a whole discussion for this run offense was what's the best scheme this offensive line can execute in the run game, because Alex Van Pelt is traditionally known for his zone-heavy scheme. But against the Bengals, the Patriots average 5.2 yards per carry in gap/one-on-one man blocking schemes, and then just under 4 yards, I think 3.7 or 3.8 yards a carry in zone schemes. Especially with the guys that they've drafted, like Layden Robinson, the rookie out of Texas A&M. He's very much like your old school mauler in run blocking. And I do feel like this is something that would change a little bit, that the amount of zone runs will come down a little, because I don't think they run the ball in zone scheme 65% of the time against the Seahawks. I think that number will come down close to being even between a gap and a zone team. And I think that is somewhere where Ramondre Stevenson thrives as a one-cut runner. So that'll be exciting to watch, and what the offensive line can do in the run blocking schemes.
It's always interesting to observe other teams and kind of follow up on. I'm a huge draft nerd, and I'm addicted to mock drafts and do a lot of draft prep. And Layden Robinson, obviously, we had our eye on offensive line prospects. He was a guy that I really liked coming out this year in the middle rounds. And even Sidy Sow was a guy that caught my eye at 2 combines ago. Is just an athletic freak. Another guy who was a draft crush of mine a year ago and was a need at the time going into the draft is Keon White. And people are certainly talking about Keon White this week after his performance in week 1, 2.5 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 3 QB hits, looked unblockable at times. It looks like it kind of took a year for him to get his feet under him. And certainly there was some transition last year, but your thoughts on Keon White and what he means to this defense?
I'm going to let the Georgia Tech alum take this one.
Oh, okay. There we
go.
go.
I've worked with the Georgia Tech football team when Keon transferred from Old Dominion to Georgia Tech. So I've seen him pretty closely, both in practice, just heard a lot about him before he was drafted. I think he definitely had growing pains both when he transferred from Old Dominion to Georgia Tech. His first year at Georgia Tech was nothing too productive. In his second year, he racked up just under close to 9.5 sacks in 12 games and got drafted in the second round. And I think he's on the same trajectory. He is a bigger guy who, for your traditional outside linebacker / stand-up rusher, but I think that is where he thrives the most. I think the one thing that stood out in the first game against Bengals was, for the first few drives that the Bengals had, DeMarcus Covington had a clear plan for him to line him up outside as a stand-up rusher, getting him some one-on-one matchups against tackles. And he's just straight up beat Trent Brown. And I think his pass rush win rate time was under 1.5 seconds on that snap. Like, absolutely lightning fast play, gets a sack on Joe Burrow. But once they started bringing him tight end help, it was interesting that DeMarcus Covington moved him all around the field, or all around the defensive line. And the play that stood out to me was his third sack on Joe Burrow. So it was a contained style rush. The Patriots used their 2 kind of smaller, speedier edge rushers in Anfernee Jennings and Joshua Uche on the outside. And Keon is basically just head up on the center, Ted Karras, and they put a combo block on him with the right guard. And with these speed rushers, they're basically just hoping the pocket collapse inward, keep Joe Burrow step up lane clean, and let Joe Burrow step up. But as soon as Joe Burrow steps up, he disengages from a combo block like it's nothing and gets a sack on Joe Burrow. And those are the things that I feel like the combination of where DeMarcus Covington is lining him up, plus sometimes you just cannot teach raw talent, and he has a lot of that. So a combination of that, I think Keon White could be a problem for the Seahawks that they will definitely have to pay a lot of attention to, especially with Abe Lucas and George Fant constantly battling injuries on the right side. I feel like DeMarcus Covington has his eye on the right side of that Seahawks offensive line with Keon White.
Good to know. Hopefully he'll get some tight end help over there. And interesting too, and because Keon White was a very popular mock draft target, even nationally, heading into that year in the first round. In some cases, late in the first round, the Seahawks they had 2 first-round picks in that draft. Sorry, my voice still hasn't recovered apparently from week 1, but they end up taking. So Keon White goes 46. The Seahawks at 37 took Derek Hall, kind of similar players and similar play style, maybe on a similar trajectory. Hall with his first sack on Sunday and was really one of the stars of training camp this year on the edge. Just a sampling of some of the prop bets available to you in this matchup on Sunday from the folks at BetUS. The over-under on Geno Smith's passing yards, 220.5. How do you like that one? And presumably, if Christian Gonzalez is going to be shadowing DK Metcalf, how do you like that matchup? Plus 125 for him to go over 65 yards, plus 7,400 for a 3-touchdown game. Do you see him matching his output as he did against the Cowboys last year? A career high for him. If you want to get in on this, head over to BetUS. Promo code YouTube150 will get you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your second and third deposits, up to $2,000. Let's talk about the quarterback, because the situation in New England is very, very unique. They take Drake May with the 3rd overall pick. May's a guy that Seahawks fans know well because, the Seahawks interviewed him, sat with him. There was some speculation that he might be a guy that they would be willing to move up for. Obviously didn't happen. And in what was a historical quarterback draft, and all the other guys that were drafted at the top of the draft, the other top 3 anyway, are all starting and were kind of anointed as starters from the beginning. Drake May is not, at least not yet. I want to go back to training camp first, though, because at first the narrative, at least from the outside looking in, seemed to be they were committed to Jacoby Brissett starting from the beginning of the year. They didn't want to throw Drake May into that. They thought he would take some time. But then that last week or two, it kind of felt like it was trending the other way. How close do you think Gerard Mayo was to naming May the starter from the get?
Not close. The reason I say not close is I think they just have a plan, and all of us idiots sitting here talking, they don't pay attention to at all. And they're just laser focused on their plan. I literally have been calling it the plan for Drake May. They know exactly when he's going to start. We were talking earlier to his injury, week 5, Tom Brady, and how that might affect. I don't think that affects Drake May at all. They are just blinders, like a horse blinders on their Drake May plan. They're giving him 30% of offensive first rep snaps at practice. And I think that's just part of the plan. They want to keep him involved with the first unit and see how he's looking, keep the plan going. And whenever the plan says to start him, and maybe he has some certain checkbox that he has to meet or some, goals that he has to, get to before he's going to be the starter. But when he gets there, he'll be put in as the starter. I think there's some variables, right? Like if the season is off the rails, that's a variable. If the season's going really well, that's also a variable too. Injury could be a variable. If Brissett gets hurt, that's a variable in the equation, right? There's some variables here, but I think if all the variables go just the way that Mayo and Elliott Wolf want, we'll see him whenever the plan says so.
Now, outside of the plan, what would have to happen? How short is the leash with Brissett? If he goes out and goes 5 for 15 in the first half and throws a pick, might we see Drake May inserted in the middle of a game, or are they just that committed to waiting until they're ready to play him as the starter?
I would probably say that if Jacoby's starting a game and he's healthy for that game, he's finishing the game out. Okay. I think that is definitely looks like what this organization's direction is. When it came to variables, I think the last variable that I would also say feels like a factor now is purely just matchups. We saw both ways that a lot of the Patriots fans had week 5 and week 7 circled as potential Drake May starting dates. And now we've seen week 5 that the Dolphins look slightly worse on multiple levels than we thought before. But week 7 was circled because of Jaguars and it's a London game. But Ryan Nielsen is also doing a fantastic job with that defense in Jacksonville. So Jacksonville clearly looks like a more difficult matchup than it looked like in preseason. So I think those matchups will also affect kind of the plan, not by too many weeks, but just a couple of weeks here and there. And as long as they're committed to the plan while accounting for the variables, I'm completely fine with waiting for Drake May for the right moment.
How much of it do you think
this season?
Pardon me?
We might not see him this season.
Okay. How much of that do you think is contingent on them needing to see some consistency from that offensive line first?
I think that is the factor. 100% is the factor. The talk around Patriots world is they're worried about Drake May getting hurt behind this offensive line, or just having defenders in his face all day long where he has no shot to actually develop on the field. Divij and I have talked about this at length, obviously having a Patriots podcast that is weekly. We're sitting here analyzing it week by week by week. And I think when we first started talking about the Drake May, we started with it's Jacoby Brissett's the veteran. He raises the floor from last year. He's going to be out there week one. And we slowly watched Drake May over training camp be really good. Like really good. Like he had some struggles early on, like any rookie does week one of training camp. And it was completely overblown when he threw a pick. But he looked really good. And then in the preseason looked like the best quarterback, and then had his head coach say it's a true position battle and this quarterback looks better, yet started the quarterback under his own opinions that looked worse, which was an interesting choice. So I think, again, it just comes down to the plan. What Gerard Mayo says to you, he is not saying to Elliott Wolf. He's having completely different conversations internally than he's having externally. And we'll talk about Gerard Mayo later, but Gerard Mayo, a lot of the criticism has been what he's saying to the media. He might be brilliantly derailing us.
Let me ask you this then. Give me both of your opinions based on everything you've seen. And Pete, I think I know yours already. But how bullish are you two on Drake May? What do you think his ceiling is? Are you both big Dre May believers?
So I did my quarterback evaluation of the top 10 quarterbacks, at least top 10 quarterbacks in my opinion, coming into the draft, and I had Drake May ranked as the second best quarterback.
Okay,
and I think I firmly stand behind that. I think he has a lot of stuff, a lot of tools that you, just like I said before with Keon White, he has a lot of stuff that you just cannot teach. Like a 6'5", 235-pound guy who runs a 4.6 40 and can throw the ball 70 yards flat-footed. It's hard to pass on a guy like that. Yeah. But along with that, I do believe there's a lot of stuff that we saw at North Carolina that we hadn't seen from the past two North Carolina quarterbacks, and Sam Howell and Mitch Trubisky, which gave him a little bit of unnecessary hate going into the pre-draft process. Some of that was making plays, intermediate passes beyond your first or second or even third read in some cases. He did not run a traditional gadgety college two-read offense like Jaden Daniels ran, which was definitely, we have seen a history now with two-read quarterbacks not being very successful in the NFL, with what we have seen with Justin Fields, Josh Rosen, Dwayne Haskins. Like, just because Lamar Jackson ended up becoming a great NFL processor, that does not mean drafting a quarterback who ran a two-read offense in college is a good idea. And one thing that throughout this pre-draft process with Drake May that statistically came up very late but stood out. So the Ringer does quarterback charting, drop back by drop back, and they have the statistic called pinpoint percentage, which is both completion percent. It's a combination of completion percentage and raw accuracy on film on passes beyond your beyond your first read. And Drake May was the first quarterback ranked there, I think, at 67%. And that is one thing that when you stand out that far in some key categories, that you need to be a field general style quarterback in the NFL. I think a lot of his running in college was because he was a far superior athlete. I think he seems like the quarterback who will run when he has to, more of a running style of someone like CJ Stroud, that they will use their legs to pick up a first down, but they're not thinking to run, or their first in response to pressure is not running, but he can pick up a first down with his legs. I do believe he's going to be like a field general style quarterback. And as for his ceiling, I think if he's developed correctly, he's an MVP caliber quarterback.
All right. Let me ask you another quarterback question, because I'm always fascinated by this. There's a tremendous amount of debate here, even among Seahawk fans, about how good Geno Smith is, and some people are adamant that he doesn't even belong in the league. I mean, there's, how extreme some arguments can get. It seems like as more time goes on, there are more in him. I'm one of them. I think he's a very, very good quarterback that you can win with if you do some other things properly. But from the outside looking in, as you look forward to this team coming into your stadium, playing your team, how do you guys quantify what you think of Geno Smith?
I'll let Pete go first on this one.
I think we all remember Geno Smith being AFC East fans here, and then seeing his transition into what was actually a good quarterback, a great quarterback that one year that he had. What was his past 2 years really have been really good.
Yeah. If you put, he had a really good first half in 2022 and then kind of stumbled and then had a rough start last year and then finished really strong.
Well, I guess I'm just saying 30 touchdowns in 2022, 20 in 2023. If you go back to his Jets days, he's not even sniffing any of those numbers. So the progression of Geno Smith has been interesting to watch. But as far as Patriots fans goes in this matchup, I think if we play man coverage, I'm not afraid of Geno Smith. It's zone coverage that he can pick apart, and the Patriots will likely man up against Geno Smith. So I don't think Geno Smith strikes fears in the eyes of the defenders. But I will say this, just looking at, Super Bowl winners and people who can win big games, I think if Geno Smith was in the right setting, like you had mentioned, and has the right supporting cast, that he can be a winner and can be a very good quarterback. So really, I think coaching will be a big factor in Geno Smith's success.
So I am compared to Pete, both on the Seahawks and the Geno Smith, I've always been slightly higher. So this past preseason, me and Pete did a show where we picked our favorite NFL futures. And one of my favorite NFL futures were Seahawks to finish top 2 in the NFC West at plus 200. And everyone said it was bold, but I just started my article for that bet by just saying this sentence. And that's why I was wanting to pull it up. I've said this before, and I will say it again. Geno Smith is a top 16 quarterback in the league, and I will take him ahead of guys like Tua Tagovailoa and Derek Carr. So that is something I still stand by. I think the only concern, which we saw last year too, and last year was both the tackles. At least this year, Charles Cross is healthy. But how does this offensive line step up, and what is Geno Smith like without Shane Waldron? We have obviously seen, like Pete mentioned, that his best years have come with Shane Waldron. And even though the skill position players are there, what does the scheme look like, and how good of an executor of that scheme is Geno Smith? But I am a very, very firm believer of Geno. I think he brings a lot to just true quarterbacking that somehow goes under the radar. And I think he has one of the more underrated arm talents in the league, especially when it comes to splitting safeties, layering throws between linebackers and safeties, things of that nature. He's very talented, and I am overall for the season, probably not for this weekend, but for overall, very high on both Geno Smith and the Seattle team.
It's interesting to hear your perspective, because that's basically, you laid out just essentially where I stand on Geno the last couple of years, and I think it's a matter of perspective, right? You say top 16, I think that and above Tua and Carr, and that's about exactly where I'd put him. To which people who want to debate me on it would come back and say, 16, that's not very good. Like I think we're living in an era where there's a lot of quarterback talent out there, and being a top 5 quarterback can no longer be the cutoff for whether or not you can win or not in this league. So interesting to hear your perspective. Now, the confidence that Pete mentioned about going against Geno, how much of that comes from that secondary? Because, man, you talk about a week 1 where, you had the second highest graded cornerback, I think, in Jones, in Jonathan Jones, even Marcus Jones, I think, finished in the top 10 according to PFF. Christian Gonzalez didn't, but sometimes I don't know about PFF's grading, because he shadowed Jamar Chase for the whole game, held him to 6 fairly inconsequential catches in that game. We're all familiar here in the Northwest with Gonzalez, having seen him play at Oregon. Is that what you would consider the strength of the defense right now going into this game? And also, do you expect Gonzalez to then shadow DK Metcalf this week like you did Chase, or is that going to be a week-to-week thing and maybe they'll just stick to a side?
So just one thing with the secondary. I do believe secondary amongst the 3 levels. When it comes to depth, maybe it's not the strongest position group that the Patriots have, but as long as those starting 5 players are there in both the Joneses, Christian Gonzalez, Duggar, and Peppers, I do think that is our best starting group. I think that's one thing that is kind of going under the radar, that Patriots were in man coverage against Bengals less than 40% of the snaps. They were very happy to play zone, very happy to take the explosives away from Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, keeping everything in front of them. And that worked out really well for them. And this is something that, like, even the last 2 years, we've seen that this one thing that the Belichick defense and the Mike McDonald defense had in common, that a lot of these guys is in the secondary, a lot of these hybrid Swiss Army knife style safeties. Like we saw that with Kyle Hamilton last year. We saw that with Kyle Duggar and Jabril Peppers over the last years, and I kind of believe we'll see some of that with Julian Love this year. I do believe that the secondary will play a little more man, but it will also come down to matchups when it comes to the Seahawks wide receiver 2s and 3s, because we would have to rotate the man matchups a lot more rather than Christian Gonzalez just shadowing DK Metcalf, because Tyler Lockett still has, I think he just finds a way to separate year after year, and we're just questioning.
Just when we wrote him off, he is the player of the game on Sunday.
So, and as much as Jackson Smith-Njigba is kind of deemed as a wide receiver 3/slower guy, I think he's a very sharp route runner and can find good ways to separate. And it is a little unfair for someone like Marcus Jones to just shadow another guy who's a sharp route runner, whereas Marcus Jones is kind of more of your traditional speedy nickel who's a hard tackler, more of a could be used in nickel blitz schemes and stuff like that. So I feel like Patriots overall man coverage rate would go up, but in the man coverage, I would expect a healthy rotation of guys being matched up rather than one guy shadowing one guy.
And then I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about Jalen Polk. I'm sitting here in Seattle. He played his college football here, part of a 3-headed monster last year that helped take that team with Michael Penix at the helm to the national championship game. Had an outstanding preseason and then ends up getting 1 target in week 1 for 6 yards. How big of a role do you see him having as a rookie moving forward?
Much bigger role than he did in week 1. I mentioned it earlier, but if you go back and watch and isolate just him, he's open on a lot of routes that he just wasn't targeted on. And Divij mentioned because he was the second or third read and Jacoby's throwing it quick to his first read or just not making it that far in his progression. But I suspect that Jalen Polk takes a little bit bigger of a role, and you see KJ Osborne slightly take a little bit lesser of a role, and they almost see them swapping positions as the weeks go on. Jalen Polk, I think, is going to be a very good wide receiver for this New England Patriots team moving forward and definitely deserves more than 1 target. We already covered ad nauseum that the run game was really the focus last week, and that's what happens. Your wide receivers just don't get as targeted as much. I was suspecting Pop Douglas, to have a much bigger role last week, and he only had 2 catches. So I think it was just the whole offense as far as pass catches were down. Hunter Henry didn't have nobody had a game in the pass catching as far as pass catchers go, but I think Jalen Polk shows a lot of promise. Underneath, cutting, like finding the odd spot in a zone as well as going deep. He shows the versatility there.
Yep. And with Jalen Polk, as a Seahawk fan, the one thing I would look at is Jalen Polk on film was surprisingly very strong for a guy of his stature against jammers and press coverage. And that was something that we saw a good bit at Washington as well. Yeah. That he has an ability to fight through press and absorb a lot of that contact. And this week in man coverage, I do expect him to get a decent amount of looks from Devin Witherspoon, who's a very, very physical cornerback.
Indeed.
And I think if it's a obvious passing situation, and I see Witherspoon closer to the line of scrimmage, kind of in the direction of Jalen Polk, my eyes will be set on that matchup.
And let me finish with this. I mentioned, obviously, both of these young defensive-minded head coaches taking over for legendary coaches. No one more legendary than Bill Belichick. I was just reading this morning about some cool little cultural things that Mayo has instilled. The running the hill thing got some publicity this week. What have you guys noticed about? Because we've seen it here. It's a fine line to walk. You don't want to wash all the history away and disrespect the legend that was before you, but you also want to do things your own way and forge your own identity. How have you seen Jared Mayo try to do that to make this his team while also respecting the past?
Gerard Mayo, week 1, took down all of Bill Belichick's signs, and everyone around New England Patriots camp was going, "Oh no, he's getting rid of everything Belichick." That's just not true.
Weren't the only ones? I thought that was the Mike McDonald sin.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you got to do, right? You're the new boss. You come in, you kind of like make it yours a little bit. He moved the office around, put his desk so that when players walk by his door, they can see him. whereas Belichick was tucked in a corner and you couldn't see if coach was there or not. You had to kind of like go stick your head in the office. So he's just doing a couple things to keep it fresh. He's got a mini hoop in the locker room. People are having fun. People are talking to the media. But I think Gerard Mayo is also going through his own rookie progression himself, right? He said publicly, but in the free agency, that we were going to burn some cash. We didn't sign anybody really, right? We just re-signed our own players. And he had to walk back those statements a couple of days later on public radio, right? And he keeps saying these things and having to, own them the next week at the press conference. So I think he's learning what not to say and what to say. And he's actually, when it came to the Judon drama, said, we're going to keep this in-house. And I think that was like a little light bulb went off. He just learned you can't talk about everything so openly. And that's what Belichick always did with the media, right? He just gave you nothing. So I think Mayo's learning, maybe I'll give you something, but not everything. I need to learn that fine balance as coach. But as far as how he did in week one, I thought he was brilliant in week one as far as being a head coach, leading the defense mainly, right? Because I'm assuming he's delegating the offense completely to AVP and the rest of the coaching on that staff.
Yeah.
Yep. And then culturally, or I would say both culturally and philosophically, the things you can see from both last year's Patriots team and this year's, or the Belichick era Patriots team and the team we saw week one, was the things that were emphasized were still very similar. Being physical at the lines of scrimmage. I think we are still not a very good pass protecting offensive line, but the approach is don't be passive in pass protection. Just because you're stepping back does not mean you have to be passive. Same things on the defense that, hey, you allowed a catch, that's okay. Tackle as hard as you can. Just being to the ball, keeping your eyes and ears open, being aware, tackling hard. And I think the philosophies are very similar when what we had with Belichick and Mayo. I think Belichick was more of a game plan scheme coach. I think, or when it comes to a coaching archetype, I think Gerard Mayo is definitely more of a player's coach. And a lot of our players came out after last week's game saying like they'll run through a brick wall for him. This is the team that they've all bought into.
Yeah.
So I think that is something that culturally is different, but I feel like the team's philosophy is still very same.
Final question. Your former quarterback who mastered his one area of his profession, unlike anyone ever has now moved on to another one. And it's been talked about quite a bit for a year. And he has his first debut in Tom Brady as an analyst. And he's getting beat up pretty hard this week for his debut and his performance in his first rookie appearance as an analyst. What did you guys think of how Tom Brady did in his new career as a color commentator?
I don't know if I can say anything bad about Tom, but that performance wasn't too good as far as commentators go. I felt like he was pausing before speaking a lot. I was really kind of afraid to speak his mind. I think as he gets more comfortable, like anyone, he'll get better. But that's just my Patriots fan. Like, come on, Tom, be great at this too. Come on, Tom, be great at this too. But he let me down as a commentator week one.
Yeah, I do think he got better as the game went along. But I think I expected a lot of him to actually do more breakdowns like we saw clearly on that Browns offense. There were a lot of protection breakdowns, a lot of bad decisions from Deshaun Watson. And I feel like there was a certain level of hesitation from Tom to kind of show what went wrong there for the Browns and actually go into too much detail. There were some silences there. I'm hoping those are just nerves and they pass by. But on the other hand, we have seen Bill Belichick do his media debuts too. And Bill Belichick has been awesome in the media so far. A couple of his breakdowns, like obviously we all kind of knew when Bill Belichick break down that Ed Reed play when he picked off Tom Brady in 2008. And we saw that this guy is kind of built for this breakdown style media job. And Belichick's doing great for that. So I'm hoping Tom kind of steps into an analyst role as well. It also doesn't help him that he's filling into Greg Olson's shoes, who was last year the best analyst next to one of the best play-by-play callers. So
I think
Well,
it'll
also-
come. I think it'll come. I mean, certainly we've saw, especially over this last offseason, as it felt like he was prepping for this, that, he'd make podcast appearances and be interviewed and get really in depth about some really cool stuff. And he was, as articulate as you can be. I think he's just uncomfortable in that chair week one, but he'll figure out a way to work it out, as he always has.
He also doesn't have the same tools that everyone else has that sits in that same chair. As his bid to be a part owner of the Raiders, he's not allowed to interview players, watch practices of the opposite. He's not allowed to do a lot of the things that set you up to be a very successful commentator. He has no antidotes because he didn't speak to any of the players before the game because he can't, right? So there's some limitations on him being good. So he really does have to persevere to be good. Again, that's a Patriots fan speaking.
Well, guys, this was great. You're a very, very good team together, and I appreciate your time coming on today. I don't pick games. I don't pick scores. So I'm not going to ask you for a prediction there, but let the people that are watching, in fact, in case we pick up some Patriot fans that haven't seen your content before, or even some Seahawks fans who want to check in later, where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, please give the podcast a follow at Fox Fellas Pod on Twitter. Foxborough Fellas Podcast is the name of it. We have an episode every Monday and Friday breaking down Sunday's performance, and then Friday. So we have an episode tonight, actually, 8:30, getting you ready for the Seahawks matchup. So give us a follow. You can find me online at Pete_Collins_ on Twitter. And Divij?
Yeah, so you can find me at Divij on Twitter, and we are also affiliated with Boston Sports Zone, so Boston Sports Zone on Twitter as well. We have content related to all Boston teams there. And thank you so much for having us on. This was absolutely a blast.
Yeah, thank you.
For sure. Always love chopping it up with football fans and content creators. And I'll be sure to put your handles and everything and the link to your podcast down below in the description for anyone who wants to watch it as well. Thanks, guys. Good luck on Sunday.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you.
Once again, that's Stephen Douglas and Company. The name of this song is Dopamine. Very, very good friend of mine. If you follow me on Twitter, you saw pictures of us at the football game together on Sunday. Just a heads up, you can find him on Spotify, Stephen Douglas and Company. The full album that this song appears on comes out Monday. Album release day coming up on Monday. Check them out if you like what you hear. Until then, follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. I will see you on Sunday with a live reaction show to what we see in, I almost said Foxborough, but it's now Gillette Stadium. See if the Seahawks can get to 2-0. And also big shout out to Dana O'Gorman, my former co-host from Field Goals, and you've seen her a lot on the show. It's high time to get her back on the show and get her thoughts on what's happening so far. She's going to be in town tomorrow. I'll get to meet her in person, so that'll be really cool. And I'll try to lock up a guest appearance for her on this show because I know you guys like the combo, so we'll tackle that. As always, thank you to BetUS for sponsoring this episode. Forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching, you guys. See you Sunday. Is all I really need. Light me up, get me high, deal with society. When I